Well, welcome to the community library here in Manchester. My name's Johanna Miller. I'm the Energy Program Director at the Vermont Natural Resources Council. We coordinate the Vermont Energy and Climate Action Network, which is the umbrella of town energy committees in Vermont, and we've just been working with the Public Service Department to logistically help them put these public forums together with the goal of this evening and through a public process in general, get input from you all and many others on what the long-range comprehensive energy plan looks like, and what are the strategies and solutions that Vermonters hope the state embraces. So I'm just going to do a quick agenda review, or just agenda overview, share with you about a little bit about what we hope to get out of this evening from you all. But first, just starting first with thanking you for giving up this beautiful evening in the lovely state of Vermont to help us figure out how the state can chart a clean energy future. In just a moment, I'm going to turn it over to Jim Sullivan from the Bennington County Regional Commission, who's going to give a brief overview of the deeper energy planning that the Regional Commission is undertaking right now in partnership with the Public Service Department. Then I'm going to turn it over to Commissioner Chris Recchia, who's here to sort of set the frame and the tone for what the department is doing through this comprehensive energy plan update. And again, what we're hoping that we can work with you all tonight to do, but that I think the department is interested in terms of getting input on how do we chart our energy future. And then after that, we're going to get an overview, and this is a slide presentation from Asa Hopkins. Dr. Asa Hopkins is the Planning and Policy Director at the Public Service Department. So he's really going to provide a deep overview of where we are in terms of our energy picture right now and where we hope to go, guided by input of a variety of stakeholders, including you all. Then we'll save some time for questions and answers and comments. That will be probably about 10 or 15 minutes. And then we have, as you see around the room here, we're going to go into some breakouts with the goal of getting as much specificity and input from you all on the strategies and solutions you'd like to, again, see the state embrace, and they're broken out in different sectors. So I'm going to talk in a little more detail about that after the big presentation, and then before then I'm going to turn it over to Jim Sullivan from the Bennington County Regional Commission to talk a little bit about what's happening here in the region on energy planning.
I know a lot of you here, so a lot of you here know that I like to talk about energy all the time. So I won't bore you with my usual rant about energy. What I do want to say is, I think that this is a really important process that the department is engaged in with the comprehensive energy plan, because energy really encompasses everything we do in society, and from where we live and how we live and the food we eat and how we get around. And it's absolutely fundamental to the future economic well-being of the region and our communities. So the regional planning commissions are very excited to be part of this process of the comprehensive energy plan, and also part of, as Johanna mentioned, a kind of a detailed, in-depth planning process at the regional level that has been made possible through the cooperation and some funding support from the department, with Commissioner Recchia and Asa Hopkins have been great advocates to help move this work along. Yeah, the Bennington County Regional Commission, we had created an energy plan back in the early 1980s, before I worked at the Regional Commission even, just before. And we had not updated that until about 2008. We updated it in 2008, and I think it was a good plan, and it was a forward-looking plan. It was a pretty aggressive plan, but at the same time, I think one of the things it really lacked was a lot of specificity and targets and goals. And what we've been able to do now in this more recent effort, working with the Public Service Department, Vermont Energy Investment Corporation, Energy Action Network, and some other partners, is to really provide some numbers and some goals and some targets about what are we going to have to do in the Bennington region, what are our communities going to have to do, what is the state going to have to do to move ourselves toward the state's long-term energy goals. One of which, and an important one, is to obtain 90% of energy from all sources, from renewable sources by 2050. And like, well, that's a pretty, it's kind of provocative to throw that out there, 90% by 2050. But what does it really mean in hard numbers? And that some of the early results and numbers that we've gotten from the study, working with VEIC and others, gives a little hint of what that's going to look like. I mean, one thing is we're going to have to, as a state and a region, reduce our total energy consumption by about a third. I don't want to talk ahead of the program here, but I know you're going to cover some of this stuff. So I'll get some of the numbers wrong, so you can correct me. But you know, and what are the other things we're going to have to do? Well, conservation is going to be absolutely critical. You know, how are we going to achieve that? You know, building weatherization for existing and new buildings, more efficient vehicles, potentially likely reduced amount of driving, because transportation is a huge energy consumer. More efficient machinery and equipment, appliances, electricity. You know, we're going to have to find ways to be more efficient, to use less of those things. That's probably, it's probably the thing that doesn't get nearly as much attention as some of the renewable energy stuff that's out there with, you know, wind turbines and solar farms and all that kind of stuff. But it's absolutely critical, and without that, the whole package just doesn't work. You know, we're going to have to be looking at alternative fuels and systems. We're going to, I mean, this, you know, if you look at the numbers, the only way to get there is basically we're going to have to say, you know how almost everybody, the vast majority of folks in Bennington County heat their homes and their businesses with oil or propane gas? Well, by 2050, that's pretty much going to go away, and it's going to have to be replaced by alternative heating systems. Alternative heating systems that hopefully are going to have to put out fewer BTUs, because the buildings are going to be a lot tighter, as you mentioned. Vehicle fleet, you know, just as interesting, right? We all, somebody may have driven here in an electric vehicle today. I don't know. Somebody might have walked. Somebody might have ridden their bicycle. But we're talking about, you know, realistically, you know, we're going to have to move our entire vehicle fleet away from gasoline and petroleum diesel powered vehicles over the next 35 years to achieve those goals. Not an easy or a simple change to accomplish in 35 years. We're going to have to think very long and hard about, you know, lifestyle and behavior as well. You know, where do we live and how do we live? You know, where does our food come from? You know, things like that really affect how much energy we use. And importantly, we're going to have to obtain a lot of our energy, you know, both our space heating fuels like woody biomass, as well as our electricity from more local sources, and we have come to rely on in the past. We're probably, you know, let's say, order of magnitude looking at, you know, 100 megawatts of new electricity generation capacity in Bennington County from renewables over the next 35 years. And, you know, like, just by way of looking, and it depends, of course, a lot on the mix of solar, hydro, wind, all that. But, you know, just for way of example, the one larger scale renewable energy project we have in the region in Pownell that you might be familiar with down at the racetrack is 2.2 megawatts. So, you know, if we're looking at, I think the estimates are actually 130 or so megawatts in Bennington County, very preliminary estimates. So think about, you know, that times 50, but maybe not in 2.2 megawatt facilities, maybe on a lot of individual properties and homes and businesses and smaller facilities, but a lot of new renewable energy development in the next 35 years. So then the big question is, well, how do we get there? We get there by implementing a lot of very specific targeted strategies, and those are exactly the types of things that we're going to be talking about tonight, and which I think are already all written out for us. So, but I will save that for our folks from the department. So thank you very much.
And really quickly, thank you. So I'm remiss from doing this. We've hosted, this is the third of 4 forums. This is the smallest group, but clearly the most lively and engaged. But the one thing that we've done before, which is always, I think, helpful for us to know, get a flavor of who's in the room. So just out of curiosity, how many of you are on town energy committees? How many of you are select board or select board members? Any select board members? Regional Planning Commission members? One select board member? Regional Planning? Yeah, fabulous. And how many senators in the room? Just one. This will give us a flavor of the folks. And how many just concerned citizens? I think we can probably all raise our hands for that one. Anyway, I think it's just helpful to get a sense of who's in the room. And without further ado, to give us more of a clarity around why we're here and why this is so important, I'm going to turn it over to Commissioner of the Public Service Department, Chris Recchia.
Thank you, Joey. Thanks very much. Thanks, Joey. Thanks, Jim, for that. For doing what you're doing, and also thank you, all of you, for being here, because we're embarking now on a refinement of the 2011 plan. That was the one that, as has been described, set the goal of 90% renewables by 2050. A very aggressive and important goal. But what's behind that? Let's talk about what's behind that. What's behind that is energy security for Vermont, stable energy prices for Vermont, contributing to climate change reductions in terms of CO2 emissions, and making sure we're doing what we can do on that task. You know, we export about $1 billion a year from Vermont. For Vermont, you know, this is a small state with 620,000 people. $1 billion a year out of the economy for fossil fuel related energy, be it home heating oil or vehicle gasoline. And so, you know, what do we want to do? What do we want Vermont to look like? And how do we want to leave this for the next generation? And in my mind, I think we want to do that in a way that is acknowledging that we all need energy. We all need to be able to turn on the light switch and have lights come on and be able to be comfortable and warm in our homes. But we do not need to waste any of it. And we do not need to create energy from things that are far away or not within our purview, solely to just, you know, be able to say, oh, Vermont, the Green Mountain State, look how beautiful it is. We have suffered for years from acid rain and from mercury deposition from coal-fired power plants out west. We need to change that for ourselves. And, you know, Vermont has been constructively engaged in that for the last 5 years. We've done tremendous work. ASA will review what we have accomplished so far. But there's a lot more to do, and I think if I were to leave you with one impression tonight, it would be to understand the order of magnitude of the energy we use for our heating, for our transportation, and for our electricity demand. You know, unlike Jim, who felt badly about it, I will not feel badly about preempting some of ASA's slides. So, you know, we're doing really well on electricity. We're about 45% renewable right now. We're doing less well on home heating and homes. We're at about 20%. And, you know, the transportation is even less. But let's talk about homes for a minute. You know, we have an issue here where we have a lot of older housing stock. It's one of our beautiful Vermont assets is to look at these old farmhouses. I live in one, 1816. It's going to celebrate its 200th birthday next year, so you're all invited to the party. I have no idea. Yeah, exactly. I have no idea what the party will be like, but you know, but the house will be there, which is great. I know what it takes to renovate that and to still keep the historic preservation aspects of it and yet make it energy efficient. And it's a challenge a lot of Vermonters have. And then we've got the added conundrum of rental units where the resident pays the energy bill and the owner, the incentives are not structured to accomplish what we need to accomplish. And yet when you do this energy efficiency improvements, people are more comfortable. People live better. This is not conservation in the sense of, and I love Jimmy Carter, I'm sorry to say this, I won't use him, but this is not just putting on a sweater to be warmer. This is like figuring out how to save money, increase efficiency, and be comfortable so that you have a choice of whether to put a sweater on or not. And that's where we are today. We've done a tremendous amount. We've got 10 times the amount of solar that we had 4 or 5 years ago. With that growth comes some growing pains, which I want to acknowledge and we need to address. And part of that is why the department is supporting the Bennington County Regional Planning Commission in their work to figure out what does this look like for Bennington. A lot of the towns and communities have focused on land use in the past, but they really haven't focused necessarily on energy consumption and how best to do that. And I'm very excited about the work that is going on here. And we're doing 2 other regions to try and pilot this process of making sure that communities have a role and a say in how to improve energy development in this distributed model that we've created. The other thing to know is, as I say, a person is never a prophet in their own country, but the bottom line is, Vermont has seen relatively stable energy prices over the last several years. You need to know that the other states in the region in New England are seeing double-digit and in many cases 100% increase in their retail electricity costs. Why is that? Well, they chose to deregulate, and they are focused, as Asa will show you, there's a chart where they are focusing only on the next couple of years in their energy portfolio. They basically buy the cheapest thing that's available today. That's it. And they don't look any further. And as a result, they are getting hammered with increased costs that come from not being able to plan and project ahead. We have chosen not to deregulate, and we have utilities that are focused on the long range, and that is very helpful. They are good partners in this process. And so we have seen the ability to project, 20, 30 years ahead and say, we're going to make it. We're going to make it. And I am glad you're all here. I really appreciate it. We need your ideas as we refine this plan. Some of the basic questions of what does this look like for Vermont? What proportion should we do ourselves? What proportion should we import of renewables? And what we do in the state, what does that look like in terms of preserving our heritage, preserving the things we like, and yet trying to keep some of that $1 billion of energy costs here. So I thank you all so much for coming. I appreciate your input, and we look forward to your ideas. So I guess I'll introduce my stellar director of Planning and Energy Resources at the Department of Public Service. Asa will walk us through this. Asa is basically really doing a great job in managing this whole affair in terms of like putting the plan together. So here you go, Asa. Do you want me to sing you a song or anything?
No. One of the nice things about having had Chris come to each of these is that each one he gives a slightly larger fraction of my talk. So we are, and it's lovely, but it's also not. Let's try this. Great. So that enables me to then go a little bit faster through the rest of this one. Does this work? Yes. All right. So, well, the folks who are here, and I'll just have the folks who are on my staff just wave their hands and acknowledge. Barry, Andy, and Brock are here to help mostly with the part after. But while we are all folks from the Public Service Department, this is by no means a Public Service Department only comprehensive energy planning process. We are working very closely with our fellow policy wonks of all sorts at the Agency of Natural Resources, at the Agency of Transportation, and the Agency of Agriculture, and Commerce and Community Development, and Human Services, both the Low-Income Weatherization Program and the Department of Health. And then Department of Buildings and General Services is spearheading our efforts to work to make the state an exemplar and allow the state itself as an energy consumer to lead by example. Of course, energy is by no means a government thing. Almost all of our energy lives in the private sector in some form or another. We don't have public gas stations or public fuel dealers, and our utilities are overwhelmingly private companies. And so we depend on actions of many in order to achieve any sort of collective goal. So we need help in this process from members of the community of all sorts, from our regulated utilities, from other energy service companies and consultants and other experts, from public interest organizations and community groups, from the business community and from town energy committees and many, many more, just in order to have a chance to understand the entire picture and actually get action. So the Comprehensive Energy Plan is not something we just sort of decided one day that we were going to create. It's required by Title 30 of the Vermont statutes, and it's something that we have to do every 6 years now. And we have to look at how we use energy, what we use it for, where does it come from, what does it cost, what are the economic implications, and what are the environmental impacts of our energy choices. The plan is to include actions that the government might take at all different levels, but also actions that the private sector might take, and how to incent those kinds of actions to perhaps take place. Of course, regulation, both from a land use standpoint, siting regulation, business regulations of all sorts, and utility regulation all play a role there. And we're also to include any suggestions for other legislation that might be required. And I'll describe some of the progress that we've made in the last few years is in that arena. The statute also requires an electric plan, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to think about a comprehensive energy picture and an electric energy picture as two separate things. And so we've put them on the same time scale and explicitly blessed, the legislature has explicitly blessed the idea that they can be embodied in a single plan. So we will be producing both plans all together. We also have a really very well structured and far-sighted state energy policy that's embedded in Title 30 that asks us to strive for energy policies and programs that allow us to meet our energy needs in a way that's adequate, reliable, secure, and sustainable, that is affordable and encourages economic vitality, that uses resources efficiently and manages demand cost effectively, and is environmentally sound. And these are the same themes that you've heard from many earlier speakers this evening, and that come up again and again in all of our conversations around energy in the state. And we also need to recognize that there are other goals in the statute. We have greenhouse gas reduction goals, including a 75% reduction by 2050. There are explicit renewable energy goals. There are building retrofit goals. There are a number of goals throughout the statute that we're trying to weave together. And I recognize also that we have goals for human health, for environmental soundness, for the economic vitality of the state that are not necessarily energy related, but which are very much potentially impacted by our energy choices. So overall, the CEP, we're going to address all energy sectors, not just electricity. We're striving for a lower greenhouse gas footprint towards the state targets. We're supporting in-state energy solutions and the associated economic growth, with the baseline also of keeping Vermont's costs for energy regionally competitive. So since we came out with the Comprehensive Energy Plan 4 years ago, we have made a number of steps of progress, which is a reason then for us to revisit the plan, update it, talk about what the next steps in each of these areas are. So I'll do heating, mobility, and electric power for the next 3 slides. So on the heating front, we've continued our state and utility efficiency programs. That's low-income weatherization, Efficiency Vermont, and all the other associated efficiency programs. Not, frankly, at a pace sufficient to meet the building energy retrofit goal, but those programs have in fact continued and in fact have saved Vermonters a lot of energy and a lot of money in the intervening years. We also passed in the last session H40, now Act 56, a renewable energy standard with an energy transformation tier that it explicitly sets us on a path to have our electric utilities help with weatherizing buildings and other ways of reducing fossil fuel use for heating. We've updated the state's building energy codes, which we do every 3 years. We were the first state in the nation to adopt building energy codes based on the most recent 2015 International Energy Conservation Code. The Building Energy Disclosure Working Group met and has developed quite a good groundbreaking label that we are now in the process of finalizing and rolling out, and also educating other states on how to do as good of a home energy label as we have now developed in Vermont. And we're thinking then about how to use that most effectively. On the building retrofit front, we did have a thermal efficiency task force that the last plan called for, where we identified what resources would be necessary to actually achieve the 80,000 home by 2020 goal, which was an important number to know. It was also a large number, which helps explain why we have not actually got the resources deployed to actually hit that goal. On the frame of trying to figure out new different things to try, we had 2 different pilots that I'll mention. First is that we now have a loan, essentially interest rate buy down loan guarantee product that the state has put our own money towards. The Heat Saver loan program, where forward-thinking fuel dealers and building performance contractors can offer to their customers low interest financing to help with heating system improvements and with weatherization. And of course, the Regional Planning Commission pilot that Jim already talked about, and which we're very excited about trying to think about what can be done at levels other than just the state level, about trying to drive demand for weatherization, and other heating choices. Things like, one of the things that we've asked the RPCs to do is to identify where district heating projects might be appropriate. That's something that is really known at the ground level in towns and counties, but which really can't be driven in the same kind of way from Montpelier. So on the mobility side, in terms of policies, Vermont is one of the signatories of a multi-state zero-emission vehicle memorandum of understanding. We have adopted California's air emission standards for vehicles, which is one of the main drivers for the deployment of electric vehicles in the state. I'm pleased to see both a Volt and a Leaf in the little while coming to and from here this afternoon. Again, the H40 Act 56 sets up sets a structure whereby our utilities will help us reduce fossil fuel use, including in transportation. And again, the RPCs are leaders in transportation planning at the local level. In terms of actual change on the ground, the changes over the last few years have been notable. We now have 10 times as many plug-in electric vehicles in the state as we did 4 years ago, maybe even 3 years ago. In either case, the number was very low, and so a 10x increase still leaves us a long ways to go. We have had a 5% reduction in gasoline consumption in the state in those 4 years, a 6% increase in transit ridership, and a 17% increase in rail ridership. Given how much gasoline we use in the state, a 5% reduction is nothing to sneeze at. It also explains why anytime you talk to the Secretary of Transportation, you hear nothing except what that's doing to their transportation fund revenue. On the electric power side is where the bulk of H40 Act 56 will have its impact, both driving us from our current 45% renewable electric to 55% by 2017 and then 75% by 2032. And in terms of driving the development of new distributed generation in state, it ramps from 1% in 2017 to 10% by 2032. So a potentially significant increase in how much of our electricity is coming from small distributed generators located around our grid, helping us to save costs here in the state. We've also reformed the standard offer program. John Spencer is here, who helps administer that program. Thanks. And the original version of that program was a sort of fixed price. If you can build it for that price, go ahead, kind of a program. And we realized that we didn't have nearly the visibility into what prices actually were in the real world as developers did. So we set it up instead as a market-based request for proposals type process, and the most recent projects that have come in on the solar front are well under half the price that we had previously calculated. So there's nothing like the power of the market to get folks really focused on figuring out how to make projects work cost effectively. We've also expanded net metering. It was a 4% cap related to utilities peak. It's now a 15% cap. We may well hit that cap sometime in the next year and a half, 2 years. And we're also in the process of understanding that net metering, as it was conceived, is perhaps not sustainable in the long term, and we needed some sort of long-term vision for net metering that was sustainable and cost-effective over the longer term, so that we wouldn't have to just be bumping from cap to cap to cap along the way. So the Public Service Board is leading a rulemaking process just right now to do that. Recognizing that we can do a lot of planning at the state level, but we need information, particularly on land use, from the towns and regions. That's one of the main insights that came out of the work of the Energy Generation Siting Commission that was, I think, 2 years ago or so. And of course, this year we again have a solar siting task force that will have its first meeting next week. So we are continuing to engage with and struggle with what does it mean to do the right kind of planning for siting, for land use decisions, for generation in order to meet our goals. And of course, the RPC planning pilot being a comprehensive look at the regional level, again, shows up again and again in this process as something that we have very high hopes for. So in terms of the actual process, we're here on the third line down in terms of our public forums. We met with stakeholders. I know several of you here were able to attend in late June. We have an initial comment period running through the end of this week. Please go online when you get home. Find the Energy Plan website. The link is at the end of the presentation. I'll leave it up. And we have an online form set up there to help some prodding questions and also some open space for you to fill in your thoughts and help us understand how best to meet these aggressive goals. So we plan to have a draft comprehensive energy plan out in September, or hopefully early September, and then we're going to do it all over again. We'll be out traveling around the state, public hearings and meetings around the state, further opportunity for written comments through the fall, incorporate those comments into a final plan by the end of December. So let me turn a little bit and talk about a little bit on the numbers side, how we actually use energy in the state. Where does it come from? So this slide is a lot of information, so bear with me, but this section on the left just breaks us down: electricity, gas, distillate fuel oil is both heating oil and diesel, wood, propane, natural gas. On common units, about just total picture, what energy do we use in the state? And on the right, it breaks it down, well, what do we use it for? So we use gasoline overwhelmingly for transportation. Transportation itself is overwhelmingly gasoline and diesel, almost none for electricity, obviously, at this point. But recognizing also this means that electricity is a fraction, is the largest individual piece here, but it's also small on the picture, on the sense of the whole energy picture. Thus, the interest in trying to understand how to make progress elsewhere. We use almost half of our electricity in residential, maybe about 40%, and about 60% for commercial and industrial. Residential, basically everything along here is all the different ways that we heat our houses. So there's a great deal of diversity, and again, a great deal of diversity. Well, in heating commercial buildings and industry as well. Industry is even that much more diverse in terms of all the different kinds and ways that energy is used. So if you add all of this up, you see that we get about 20% of the state's heat from renewable sources. 6% of our mobility is renewable. That's basically the ethanol and gasoline. And 45% of our power is renewable, leaving us overall about 16% renewable. So Chris basically already did this piece of why go from 16 to 90. Should mention one piece of context that Chris didn't mention, that this goal was informed by and supported by extensive analysis and public comment in the previous plan, and we're building from that base. As Chris mentioned, we're aiming for energy security and stable prices. We're obviously aiming to mitigate our impacts on climate change, keeping our energy dollars local, and reminding that the only energy source that we actually have that we can harvest directly here in the state are renewable. This is the slide that replaces the one that Chris mentioned, unfortunately, about where does our electricity come from. So this is just a snapshot of what we know and what we don't know about where our electricity might come from in 2030. So think forward 15 years. We already know, because our utilities either have long-term contracts or own various generators, we already know a reasonable amount about where that energy comes from. So we know that we'll get a chunk about this big. I purposely didn't put the numbers on here because it's not, the actual overall size of the pie is not quite known at this point, thus this question mark is a double question mark. But we'll have some reasonable amount, maybe 10% or so from nuclear. This is a long-term contract that our utilities have with the Seabrook nuclear facility in New Hampshire. A little bit from peaking gas and oil burners. This big chunk is Hydro-Quebec and the power that we're able to get from New York, from the Niagara and St. Lawrence hydro facilities. The next piece is in-state Vermont hydro. Then wind, both in-state and out-of-state. Methane, both digesters and landfill methane. Wood, this is McNeil and Ryegate. Solar, and then what? So that's what we're hoping that this process will help with, and that you all can help us understand where we should be looking. Which of, either is there something missing that we're not actually counting at all, or which of these wedges need to grow and by how much to fill in the rest of this, recognizing that basically it's 50%, this sort of southeastern half is renewable, in some form or another, and that will be 55% in a few years and nearly 75% by 2032. So at least this much of that wedge needs to come from renewables of some sort in order to meet our state objectives. So where? So what? So help us out with that, please. So to pick up where Jim Sullivan mentioned, on a total energy basis, I think one of the things we're hoping to drive home with this comprehensive energy plan is not the one line 90% by 2050, but the two line, reduce our total energy demand by at least a third and meet 90% of the rest with renewables. So to couple that energy use reduction from the beginning into that statement of goals. So this is informed by modeling we did for our total energy study, which we published last year, showing, first of all, generally what does it look like to go from today to 2050, and see that the total amount of energy falls significantly, well over a third in this version of the model. That we use, this blue bit is electric for heating. That's heat pumps taking up a large fraction in the case of this model. This is just one snapshot of some modeling results. The future, of course, will be something that maybe looks like this and maybe doesn't. But just to get a sense of scale, if we use heat pumps for this much total energy, electric vehicles for this much, those play a good part in how we take this large red blob, which is heating oil, propane, wood that we use to heat our buildings, and turn it into this piece, which is basically just what's left in terms of bio heat and wood for heating. How to transition industrial heat, a lot of which is wood, and transition that to using heating oil, biological bioheating oil plus wood. How to have the electric use in industry stay flat, the electric use in other buildings fall for other purposes besides heating and transportation, and have this big chunk, which is basically gasoline and diesel, transition to perhaps biodiesel or something else that works on the heavy duty fleet. So there's a lot of different fuels being used in different ways by 35 years from now than there are today, but we're using a lot less energy, and we have some real chance of making a lot of this renewable. In the electric space alone, This is just, again, a snapshot of one vision, one version. If we kept the amount of electricity that we use for the typical things we use electricity for now, light, appliances, air conditioning, keep that level. Meanwhile, the state grows in population by 10 or more %. The economy grows. We get hit, that many more buildings. So there's a lot of efficiency embedded in just keeping that number flat. Building heat rising to be a significant contributor from heat pumps. The industrial sector continuing to grow, and transportation really taking off. We may go from using between 5 and 6 terawatt hours of electricity now up to more than 8, maybe 10 terawatt hours by 2050, which means also recognizing that this pie may actually be in the process of growing by 2030, not shrinking, and that means that the undetermined piece is even that much larger in terms of the actual total scale of what we need to meet our goals. So one thing that we're hoping to do in this version of the Comprehensive Energy Plan is to be a lot more concrete and focused on nearer term goals and objectives rather than just goals for 2050. So we are positing a few potential goals for 2025. There happens to already be a statutory goal. Someone had the foresight a little while ago to do this whole 25 by 25 thing. And in fact, when you crunch the numbers, it turns out to be a reasonable place to be, pretty aggressive, but also achievable on our way to 90% by 2050. So if we can increase to 25% renewable overall, up from 16 in 10 years, that will be a good down payment on getting to 90. That would mean getting our heat. These of course can be shifted around a little bit. You could take heat higher and not get as far on mobility, or vice versa. But if we did get 30% of our heat from renewable sources instead of 20, that's both using more renewables for heat and weatherizing our buildings and using fuel that much more efficiently. Change both the top and the bottom of that fraction. 10% renewable in mobility, up from 6. That would mean, for example, if 10% of our cars were electric in 10 years, that would get us to about here, along with renewable electricity on the scale of about 2/3 of our electricity being renewable by then, which is about in line with the Act 56 targets. Coupled with all of this is a 15% reduction in total energy use. So if we just think about the bottom line numbers from that, the thick blue line, 16% to 25%, perhaps to 40% in 2035, and up approaching 90% by 2050. That's the increase in renewables as a fraction of the total. The total is then the dark blue line, starting here, falling 15% in 10 years, another 15% by 2035, and down more than a third overall by 2050. And the combination of all of this then is that our greenhouse gas footprint for energy falls in half by 2035 in this model, and over 90% by 2050. So I should caveat that these lines look straight. Partly that's that anything with 4 dots is going to look reasonably straight, and part of that is pure coincidence. That when you have this kind of general trajectory, you have a lot of things that are on various stages of various adoption curves, and it happens that the total energy number happens to end up reasonably straight, and the greenhouse gas number ends up reasonably straight. But that's not because we took the 2 endpoints and got a straight edge. It does actually come out from the analysis that way. So just some snapshot of what it will take, and generally both that it is achievable, but that we have a lot of work to do, and hoping that you all can help us figure out, as we think about what the steps are that we really need to take in the next 6 years, what needs to be done now. What if we're going to have, as I think we had 154 recommendations in the last Comprehensive Energy Plan. If we're going to take at the top of each section and identify if there's only 3 things you do out of this whole chapter, you should do these 3. Right? Help us understand what those 3 are, so that we can really focus in, prioritize, and know where we need to make the biggest bang in the next few years. So happy to take questions and discuss for 15 minutes or so before we transition to the breakouts.
Hi, I'm Rick Kelly from Manchester, and I applaud all these, great ideas, and it'd be nice to be energy independent, whatever. What about, I didn't see anything here on pricing. What about pricing models? And what's going to really happen with pricing over the next 35 years?
So, anybody who tells you they know what the price of oil is going to be even a year or two out, if they knew the answer correctly, should be using that information for their benefit. But to the extent that we do know, the modeling that we did for the total energy study modeled economic costs and benefits of this transition. These model results. The economic trade basically that you end up making is that your per unit cost of energy goes up, but the amount of energy you use goes down, and your energy costs don't change all that much. The net change in both capital investment and fuel cost for achieving this versus not is about 5%. So when you actually then take that and run it through the REMI model, which is the state econometric model of what does it do to GDP and jobs and stuff like that, it depending on how you implement policies, depending on whether other jurisdictions act as well, because that matters. The net GDP impacts for the state are on the scale of plus or minus 1%. That the worst you do is anything that you would actually carry out all the way through to 2050 is down 1% or so, and the best you do is up 1% or so. It's not. It neither makes nor breaks the state's economy on average in aggregate.
What is the effect of increased price though on decreased demand?
So the model includes both. The modeling that our consultants did that had this is that you get both decreased demand because prices go up, and you get people switching to cheaper fuels because prices go up. When the policies that we modeled involve changing the relative prices of fuels, and so when some fuels get more expensive, then folks switch to the others that are more favored in terms of either being more renewable or lower carbon or what have you.
Hey, so do you mind if I just jump in? Because I think this is a key thing that we always pay attention to, but sometimes don't talk about as much as we probably should. So, it is really important to us that Vermonters save money over the long run here. That this is a benefit to Vermonters, both in terms of ratepayers for electric, but also consumers of the other products. What I would say is, in the last 4 years, we have seen very successfully that this actually does save Vermonters money and improves our economy at the same time. That $1 billion that I talked about that was going out of the economy, if we can keep it here, has amazing potential to leverage in-state efforts and jobs. We had last year we did a jobs report on renewable energy and found that 4.3% of the workforce was working in clean energy jobs, and it was about 15,000 jobs. That increased about 6.9% this year. We're going to announce, the report we released any day now. Ace is laughing because I'm the one holding it up. Thank you, Andy. Andy's laughing too. So any moment now that will be released, but that will show another 6.9% increase in jobs to about 16,200 jobs, something like that, and almost 5% of our workforce. So there's a way to do this that actually enhances the economy. If you're looking at macroeconomics, that is one component, and then in terms of the individual expenditures for energy, we think this also has the advantage of solving that problem of escalating energy costs for people. So yep. Yep, yep.
And as a result of that, you talked about all this benefit, cost-benefit analysis for in-state, when in fact, that money's going out of state, a good chunk.
Mm-hmm.
Not only out of state, it's going out of the country. So let's talk about that a little bit and plug some of those numbers into the model.
Well, I think you're right, and I think that's an area that needs to be addressed. But we are, one of our favorite things to do in the public service department is to beat up on utilities, and we do that regularly. So,
But we did do that when CPPS, GM,
yeah.
merger came through. We lost $26 million as CPPS rate.
Okay, yep, I get it, and I wasn't here then. On the other hand, what I will say is you're getting that back. The benefits that you're getting back, you are really, honest to God.
I'm sorry you're not qualifying for the low-income weatherization. It was funded by that money, but there are people out there who have homes that were weatherized by those dollars, who are saving a lot of money and who are comfortable in their homes because of it.
And I really don't want to debate the merger, but I get your point. But I will say that we are ensuring that that Vermonters are getting more benefit back than they paid, and it is occurring. We can document, we can show you that we are getting more money in savings from that merger than was spent. Granted, no, I'm going to get fired if I say it is. The $21 million, that is not, okay, I will say this. That is not how I would have handled it. Nonetheless, I think it is resulting, it is having the right result by virtue of the follow-up that we're doing on it. Okay, so I get it.
Do others have questions? If you can raise your hand, questions, comments.
I'm Annette Smith from Danby. Could you please explain how the goal of 45 now, 55, and then 70% can be met without building any renewable energy in Vermont?
Well, the statutory RPS goals. Let me find the right slide. Well, here. The 10% part by law basically has to be in the state. So I'm not going to, that part, we know that's going to be here, and the legislature settled that one. The rest of it, we could just import. If we built the relevant transmission lines,
Well,
that's a choice that we could make.
I guess what I'm getting at is that isn't it possible for the utilities to make compliance payments based on the value of the Hydro-Quebec environmental attributes to meet the goals, and that enables the utilities to continue to sell the wind and solar renewable energy credits out of state, which is what's keeping the cost down? So isn't that what has just been passed into legislation?
So the 55 to 75 is a very permissive set of definition for renewable, and the compliance mechanism is through what are called RECs, renewable energy credits. The utilities need to submit and prove their ownership of some number of RECs in each year, and those have to be RECs that correspond to power in New England. But they can be any different kind of variety of renewable energy. They don't necessarily have to correspond to energy that energy itself was directly powering Vermont. Namely, you can separate the renewableness from the power. But that is how renewable portfolio standards work. That's how renewable portfolio standards in the rest of New England work. But that top line 55 to 75, that is a purposely relatively easy to achieve, relatively flexible portfolio standard tier in order to allow us to capture benefits from renewables that other states in New England are not claiming, and be able to use that then very renewable electricity for things like electric vehicles or heat pumps or other things, which if you drive an electric vehicle on coal power, you didn't really make that much of an economic difference. But if you're driving it on power that is provably through chain of the appropriate ownership is renewable, that that you own a REC that corresponds to that, then you're actually making progress when you're using a heat pump or an electric vehicle. I will say that the previous policy, the SPEED program, which no longer exists, was imperfect in many ways. It did its job as an economic development policy. It did its job in terms of keeping rates low, but it ran its course.
I'm Karen Lee from Arlington. I have a question with regard to the pushback from our local, or I should say our Vermont fossil fuel industry. I was wondering if there's been discussion with them about their future given this hopeful prospect of meeting these goals, and what conversations you've had with them about retraining and getting them on board with renewable energy, if any. So
I won't say that we've had resounding cheers for all policy suggestions from that corner of the energy industry. But that being said, there are a number of folks in that industry who see this transition coming and who want to capitalize on the transition. This Heat Saver Loan pilot project wouldn't exist if it weren't for the partnership with the Fuel Dealers Association and with a set of, I think it's up to about 10 or so. Andy, do you know how many? About 10 fuel dealers who recognize that their future is in being energy service companies, not in per gallon sales. They already recognize that they make a lot of their annual money on heating system maintenance and other things, other kinds of service they're providing to their customers. And so recognizing that either selling cleaner fuel or selling efficiency service, because they have existing relationships with customers, building on those relationships, like that's a potential future business direction in that industry. And there are some dealers who are really jumping on that as a future. Yeah, there are others also, but recognizing that there are actually folks in that industry that we should be actually actively grabbing hold of and partnering with is a real shift, frankly, in the last few years that gives me personally a great deal of hope that that transition can be done in a way where those folks are partnering with building performance contractors, getting the relevant skills, knowing how to do audits, broadening the level of service they can provide so that it's not just I fill your tank and I leave. Transportation fuel providers may be a different question. Yeah, there's an electric charging station future for that kind of industry.
Hi, my name's Chris Williams. I'm chair of the Planning Commission in Shaftesbury, a retired architect, and I'm at work this summer on retrofitting, much needed, much delayed, energy retrofit to my old farmhouse. And I'm working with my next door neighbor, a young man named Tyler, who is really a concern when I listen to this discussion, because Tyler's 26, he works in a warehouse, he makes $14 an hour, he's kind of your average salt of the earth working Vermonter, and he wants to marry his sweetheart and buy a house. The house he lives in is a suburban ranch house, a complete mess, totally unsolvable, unredeemable structure. The best thing to do is tear it down. But, I know how to work with Energy Vermont and get a rebate for the work I'm doing. Tyler doesn't have a clue on any of this stuff. And we work together every day doing hard, dirty work, tearing out an old farmhouse. And I worry about what sort of future a guy like him has at Vermont. He doesn't understand any of this stuff that we're talking about here tonight. And there's hundreds of thousands of people like him across Vermont, and they represent a rising generation in our state. If they're left behind, we're only exacerbating a situation of inequity which exists across the whole country and is getting worse. So that, they're not going to understand efficiency Vermont, transportation goals or renewable energy by 2050. This stuff has got to be at a grassroots level to reach out to these people, and I don't see this happening in the present program.
Yeah, I absolutely. There's a big difference between, a sort of a high-flying state program or state plan like this, and what things actually need to look like on the ground directly for folks, and whether it's efficiency Vermont programs, loan programs, education programs, and workforce training, other things that really need to be happening, at the consumer-facing, workforce-facing side of things. That a plan like this can set out big, high goals, but it also needs to talk about how we're actually going to get towards implementation. So I hope that you'll help share your ideas about what does the on-the-ground part of that implementation look like. We have a thermal energy clearinghouse website going up soon that is explicitly aimed at, say, I am a homeowner, I need to figure out how I can get help and information to improve my home. Who do I call? Am I a Vermont gas customer? Can I get a heat saver loan? Who do I call at Efficiency Vermont? What programs are available for me? Am I qualified for low-income weatherization? All those different kinds of ways that you can get in to bring the expertise to bear on your building. And then on the workforce side, how can how can your young friend develop the skills that he's starting to learn working on your house if he wants to then become start working at a building performance contractor and develop those skills and actually be an implementer of this on the ground. There's folks blowing cellulose into the walls and caulking and taping to make buildings that much higher performing. So we have a whole range of different kinds of things we're going to have to do there, and your insights on what the top priorities on that list should be are very welcome.
So,
Yeah.
so just
Obvious.
So can I just, I think that's key. Over here, and I don't want to jump ahead into the next section
So-
here, but you've got one piece that was specifically asking about education and public engagement. And I agree with you. There's an echelon of people. Thank you. That we don't reach, and I would welcome your comments on how, and ideas about how to do that successful, because it is going to be more than a website. And we got the issue that I was talking about before of a lot of Vermonters of modest means also rent their homes but suffer from having to pay the energy bills. So let's creatively figure out ideas of how to deal with that. I don't disagree with you at all, and appreciate your input on it.
So just time for a few more questions. I have two back here.
I add to that. I think Chris brings up a great point, and I don't know if Brian Campion, I'm one of our state senators, Dick Sears, and I represent this area. And I know that Efficiency Vermont had some conversations with Bennington College, and I don't know, Judge, if you want to mention just briefly some of those conversations you had around how do you reach, or if you've had any success around how do you reach people that for otherwise, this is a very complicated issue, energy issues, and just give us a quick snapshot.
I think probably that Ellen will endorse energy committee. I think if you had to say what it would take.
I used to be a gym teacher. I can bellow. I think if you had to boil it down, what we came to was that that this kind of outreach is difficult. And we were struggling with this issue. I think one of the take-home things for us was that the people trust their contractors. People trust their the young fellow next door that comes and helps them with things that, helps with fixing the roof or whatever else. And that one of the secrets really has to be, especially in southern Vermont, training local contractors, and not just big contractors, but small contractors. I don't think that model meshes with the model that's come out of the central Vermont area, where a few people were trained in building performance training, and they got the letters are escaping me, but their BBPI certification. But they've been, they're I think there's one in southern Vermont, not until you get into Rutland County. There aren't any BPI certified contractors around here. It's really a problem. So there's a tremendous lack of knowledge. People will trust the person they work with, just as you would say they would trust the fuel dealer or they would trust somebody they know. And that can put it to them simply, here is something you can do that fits your situation. And we need that translation very badly. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're running out of time. I definitely have one last comment back here, just because we're supposed to wrap this up at 7, but this is great.
Hi, I'm Pete Guile. I'm from Shrewsbury, Vermont. And I was wondering if the definition of renewables is going to change again. I know Hydro-Quebec used to be not a renewable, and now it is, and it may be me being cynical a bit, but it seemed like it was changed to meet some goals. So that's my first question. The second question is about how they measure greenhouse gas emissions from fracked gas, and if they include everything from the wellhead and methane released in Pennsylvania all the way to Vermont. Thank you.
On the renewable definition thing, I'm not aware of any particular need. The only question is whether, I think we've settled this otherwise, that food waste going into a digester, there was some question as to whether or not to treat that as renewable. I think that was settled in the affirmative. But I don't expect any other not planning on any other statutory changes around the definition of renewable. If you want to do that, Chris. The question of sort of life cycle versus burner tip on greenhouse gases is a good one, both for natural gas and frankly for oil. Maybe as tar sands oil is coming to be a larger fraction of our mix. And also thinking carefully, and our forests and parks folks are really engaged in this, so thinking about, with the air quality folks, about wood, and what does it mean for wood to be renewable and carbon neutral or not. And so that's something that we are constantly striving to figure out how to do better across the board, and also to be consistent across the board, to not use a full life cycle picture for some fuels and not for others, et cetera. So we're trying to do it as correctly as we can and as uniformly as we can.
Would it make sense to use the full life cycle picture on a model?
Ideally, yes. The challenge is that in many cases the range of uncertainty means that you end up with plus or minus 20% bars on everything. Which makes it really hard to do comparisons and to try to understand where you're actually making progress. But as those error bars shrink, as we get better and better information, that becomes much more doable.
So I was going to wrap up the Q&A. We have time for one more? I'm sensitive to getting you all out of here.
Thank you. I'm Jim Morey. I'm from Wyndham. I'm on the Planning Commission. I also happen to be an 8th generation Vermonter and a graduate at UVM in natural resources. Give you some background of where I come from. I'd like to start out by saying, Asa, you're right. There's a little bit of difference between a wonderful, high thought out plan in Montpelier and maybe what happens to the everyday citizen in Vermont. And I'd like to commend Commissioner Recchia for saying that the towns and the regions should be involved in the decision making and that he likes beating up on utilities. Because I would suggest we also consider beating up on some merchant developers. So my point and my question is this. We've got some goals here that are tremendous goals. I mean, they're very worth doing. But we've also going to have a tremendous amount of build out to get this done. And today we're having troubles getting the build out done because the towns and the regions have no say in siting. The siting is left up to merchant developers and out-of-state landowners to put everything forward. And we have an example right now in Wyndham where they are proposing 31 wind towers within a half mile of town. Now, Lowell was 2.5 miles from the wind towers. We're a half mile. We've got 131 families that are within a mile. You're talking the kind of impact that is impossible to support, but you have a Spanish company, I don't think they're a Vermont company, Iberdrola, and you've got a New Hampshire landowner that is driving this process. And I'm not going to pull any punches. Iberdrola admitted to offering $7 million in financial dealings to town officials in New York under the New York Wind Energy Ethics Code in 2009. $7 million. Look at what's going on in Grafton and Windham right now, and you realize that this state has got to come to grips with the fact that there has to be some way to involve everybody in real decisions and not just ram these developments into towns without any real consideration of what they know. It's not that we shouldn't have wind. Certainly it's not that we shouldn't have solar. But you're not going to get it done if it's a tremendous fight every step of the way. We've got to fix that.
Okay. 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 Some of you channel brevity better than others, but it's very good and important conversation. But because we want a chance for everyone to speak, I'm going to kick Asa out. Sorry. But Asa is not leaving.
I'm done speaking.
Yeah. But that's the thing is we are lucky to have the commissioner and Asa staying for the second part of the segment tonight, and that is the fact that we understand that this is the comprehensive energy plan. Clearly you are all recognizing that. So how do we get around? How do we heat and cool our homes? And how do we power our homes and our buildings? So this is a big conversation, big issue. We have an exercise tonight to really ask you to be specific in the kinds of strategies, again, that you want the state to embrace comprehensively. So when you walked in the door, you should have received, I hope, a set of colored sticky dots.